Hi, I'm Sravish. This is TrustTalks, a series where we celebrate innovation, companies, and people who make GRC security and privacy transparent, accountable, and trusted. Today, I have with me Annie O'Rourke, who is the Director of Compliance, Assurance, and Audits at Snyk, and who I believe is the most passionate person you will ever hear talking about GRC. Annie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here.
Annie, I'd love to kick things off with a quick question. How did you get into this wonderful world of governance, risk, and compliance?
So it's a bit of a long-winded one. I originally was in a tech company doing account management, so working with customers on accounts, and I was getting more and more queries around things to do with compliance and governance, and I was really interested in how the teams were coming back with the responses, and I was like, where are they getting this stuff from? I wasn't really aware of it all, and the more I started digging into it, I understood that there was these whole huge processes around the organization with regards to building governance frameworks and transparent processes that the customers could take away and provide assurance for the staff. And I honestly just really got interested in. I actually went back and did another degree in business and actually focused in on risk and on things like kind of business continuity and various different things like that. So I kind of rebore myself into a new career, moved away from the sales and customer focus side of things and really got into the governance, risk and compliance. And honestly, really pleased. Like, it just enables us to get into so many different elements of business rather than just being in one silo of an organization. And I really love that. That was the big thing I liked about customer facing roles, that you worked with people to support the customer. And I feel like I'm doing that from a different perspective now.
And for those of us that are not experts in GRC or haven't taken a degree, how have you made GRC more accessible for your company? Because I'm sure you have people coming to you and say, what does all this mean? What do I have to do? How have you made it accessible so that people can actually be accountable with their GRC activities?
So there's probably lots of different elements. And one of the first things to say is that it's not a one size fits all when you're in GRC across all the different companies. It really depends on how mature they are, what stage they are in their lifetime. But I think one of the main things to me is like always be responsive and encourage people to come to you with their problems. You don't want to be that old school GRC officer or compliance officer that everyone was scared of. They're walking around with their clipboard and people are afraid of you. So essentially open the door, and I mean metaphorically as well as like physically. If we've got an office, like be welcoming to their problems and show them how you can support them through process improvements or like framework improvements, or just help them go to leadership with any risks or opportunities that they're seeing, because nearly always it will map back to some sort of internal initiative that will help mature your governance programs. Also try to leverage relationships between any kind of revenue driving activities and compliance or governance or data or anything like that. Wherever you can put a price tag on something, it really helps leadership prioritize their approach to either treating that problem or accepting it or documenting some sort of future kind of mitigation controls for it. So just providing that clear level of reporting between what can actually help grow the organization, what's going to affect their bottom line, and how that fits in with compliance and governance frameworks is really useful. What that can also do then is map back to all the different teams within the organization, how they're trying to mature, and nearly always you can start to support them through that kind of data and show them how they can go to leadership with the need to, I don't know, improve their continuity programs or their risk program or their reporting in some way. It will be able to link back to some kind of governance or risk or compliance type requirement for the organization.
I think GRC gets a bad rap, Annie, mainly because it's actually marketed incorrectly. My opinion is if people call it trust versus GRC, suddenly you're creating a kind of a different mindset on how people approach their work. And to your point, if you then tie that into the fact that it's all about earning customer trust, it's all about earning trust with your board of directors or trust with the government if you've got regulatory requirements and so on, then suddenly people start to realize that their GRC activities is all about earning trust and driving revenue, like you said. And so my question to you is, what are some practical tips that people can implement around showcasing how their trust activities are supporting revenue? Because like you said, if you can tie this into growing the business, then suddenly the rest of the organization buys in and wants to do what it takes to grow the business.
So one of the key things is, depending on what size of the business you have, try to tie in with whoever manages your like CRM processes, so your field finance or your sales, And then try to create some kind of ticketing or logging system where wherever you have any GRC type response to a customer or a prospect query, so whether that's questionnaires or jumping on a phone call if it's going through a contract negotiation, or wherever you're providing those assurance activities, to try and make sure that you're logging it. And then what you can do is start to pull at the very basic high level the details of that customer or that prospect's ARR, and start to associate that with, you know, the kind of revenue you're involved in as a GRC function within the organization. And as you start to mature those functions, you can start to log even more information about, you know, the frequency of people jumping on your website asking about compliance, the particular areas of compliance they're interested in, and the particular certifications or the reports that they're trying to download if you have a self-service area. Or even coming back to the internal ticketing system, if you're supporting a sales team, for example, you can start to log the time that you've taken for each sales call, and then start to look at that against the opportunities that you've won versus the ones that you've lost, and then really start to create that really clear reporting mechanism for your leadership around the return on investment for your GRC function. And then what you should really do is start to analyze that over time and just look where you should be tweaking anything. So what you'd like to see really is that the smaller customers, much more sufficient in dealing with the self-serve type questionnaires or data that you put on websites, and they take very little but frequent touch points with you. And then you have the higher level of customer account, the higher revenue customers, where they might need more of a white glove service, and you can actually make sure that you've got the GRC resource to always be in place there.
And to summarize that idea, Annie, one of the things you mentioned is if you can show metrics, then you can show the value of your trust program. Could you share with the audience a handful of metrics that you think are most useful to present to management or to the board of directors to show two things? One, the impact of your program in the business, as well as how do you justify budget in this world where we're all being tight with budget?
So I think depending on the maturity again of the organization, there are several elements to what you need to provide. But fundamentally, you always need to be able to show them the current health of the compliance within the organization. So that's the internal piece of, you know, looking at the different functions or the different scopes of compliance that you've got running through, and making sure that they've got really clear reporting on where things may be changing, and providing them with trend analysis as they go through change. And really what that shows them is, without that level of kind of monitoring and management of the current compliance activities, they wouldn't have that visibility. So it's really important to keep that in place for them to make decisions around how change affects, you know, the overall health of compliance within the organization. The other key areas you mature more, it's not all about risk. Obviously, risk is fundamental to the majority of all frameworks, but actually highlighting, as a compliance team or a governance function, opportunities for maturity as well. And that's something you get with the knowledge that you gain through those compliance checks and those governance activities. So it's not always bad news. We also get to start to kind of showcase, like, this is how we think that you could improve in these areas, and this is the number of customers we think would be interested in this, or this would be the financial sector would be interested in this, or different sectors. And you can start attributing those opportunities for improvement against, you know, areas that they could start reaching out to as a business. And then finally, we've got that return on investment around our compliance activity. So that's usually a quick and easy win. You can say, you know, we touched 3 million worth of ARR activities last month. This is how many tickets that we had to do. This is how much interaction we had on the calls or on phones, or, you know, direct customer conversation. And without us being here, or these bums in these seats, you wouldn't have any of this support. For the most part, though, I always find that we have the relationship with sales. So that part of the question is never really, you know, to be discussed. They're always our kind of fangirls with the, we need these as part of our sales enablement process, and this is why we need them. So that bit isn't usually so tricky. It's the kind of continued advisory that we provide, you know, that general bringing teams together to work on those maturity efforts. That's the really important piece. And sometimes that's hard to put your finger on. So it's about just keeping the reports up to date and constantly checking in on what leadership want to see from you, right? Don't assume that you know what's going to be important for them to listen to. So the areas of concern for them, what they might be thinking of doing in the future, and always try and map back to what the leadership are trying to get out of those reports.
I've always felt, Annie, that folks like you who are in GRC roles, security roles, privacy roles, etc., that you are the true custodians of trust in your companies. You are the folks that are allowing your customers to trust you, allowing your board of directors to trust you, and you're driving revenue. And I call them trust champions. So first of all, kudos on being an amazing trust champion for all the companies that you've worked at. But I'd love for you to share other folks that you've either worked with or worked for who you consider to be trust champions, people that believe that the idea of governance, risk, and compliance is a forcing function to grow the business and have inspired you to do better? Who, in your mind, are amazing trust champions?
I have a few to mention, but I'll start off with Karima Noran, who is the founder of the Privacy Compliance Hub. I've met her through networking and working with businesses before, but she really has this kind of insatiable, infectious passion to educate people in privacy. And she's come from a legal background, but really what she wants to get across is that it's our collective responsibility when it comes to privacy. And no matter how big or small the organization, no matter what you do or don't know about data privacy, she's managed to kind of get through the jargon and make sure that there's appropriate resources and education pieces in place as part of her company provision. And just her generally, when you look her up on LinkedIn, she has some really great chats about privacy. And it's all about making sure that echoing the thoughts in that we're not in this alone. Like compliance and privacy is part of a bigger picture. It doesn't just stop at us. It's our supply chain, it's our employees, it's the data that we have and the services that we provide. So it's just making sure that none of us are working alone and that we're using simplified resources to make sure that everyone has a good education in place and a good structure to manage the privacy of data and that they know their obligations and the regulations. So yeah, she's great and she's just a fab person to work with. Then I would like to go more around data, but more data governance. So a gentleman by the name of John Alvis, who has worked in both public and private sector. I had the real joy of working with him before, and he is an absolute guru around data governance. So I don't know how he does it, but the wizardry that he brings to the table is data mapping, putting in governance programs in, fast-paced, moving organizations that have reams of data flowing through all different solutions and services, and how to bring that back into a holistic overview that then my team can use not only to audit against and check compliance against these systems and tools and the data within them, but then it enables us to have a really clear and concise conversation with our customers about what data we have, what we're doing with it, and I can feel, really comfortable with the information I'm giving out. He's a really nice guy. And like I said, I don't really know how he manages to manipulate all of the massive stuff in his head onto paper into clear, concise processes that are actually really easy to consume, no matter what role you're in. But yeah, it's just, it's another area of trust that we really depend on within an organization. And it's the kind of thing that most organizations I've worked with before are kind of lacking, but it's a really important role. And I'm hoping to see more and more of those type of roles in the future, specifically. Again, not the more traditional data governance, but the more holistic working across the organization and bringing people together to have that clear image of data across the organization. And then my last but no means least is a wonderful lady who used to work for me, actually, Rena Beecher, who's stayed in the wonderful field of GRC. And not only is she a really energetic and fun person to work with and kind of puts the old auditor to bed with regards to how she approaches it. Again, she's really passionate like me. We want to have really, confident, good controls within the organization. And it's about working with people in a pragmatic way to bring all of those controls together. But the main aim is so that when we're talking to customers and we're educating our staff, like our sales and our customer services staff, they have the ability to feel empowered to have those compliance conversations too. We don't want to always be doing it ourselves. And Rena really goes out there and makes sure that she has really good assurance programs. She's educated people internally. There's the documentation and the collateral internally to support any of the conversations that need to be had with customers and prospects around compliance. And not only that, continuing to maintain the controls internally is really important to her. And then the other side of it is the mentorship that she brings to her teams in the GRC functions. It's not really the sexiest of titles to go into, but it's like about bringing people in and bringing people up, and you can actually see all of the different roles you can get into within GRC. So having that kind of energy to bring to the role and, being able to bring that excitement to what some people might think is a really boring role and actually explain the diversity you get to be involved in, the complex problem solving you get to be involved in, the customer relationships you get to build is really important. So she really shines the beacon and all of those things.
That's amazing. I love those three stories. And Annie, what about vendors? What vendors do you believe are doing innovative things to push the boundaries on how security and privacy related applications and projects and initiatives should be implemented in a company?
So I probably could start digging into things like risk tools or GRC tools, but there are lots out there. And honestly, I'd like to kind of pivot and talk about one of the aspects of compliance that we struggle with a lot, which is training and awareness. So we need training and awareness programs for whatever framework you put in place, right? You have to be able to prove that to your auditors. You have to be able to make sure that it works and it's effective. So we've actually used a company called Awarego in the past. And the thing I loved about them is that their training, it meets all of the compliance requirements, but it's micro training, but it's just funny, right? It engages you, it brings you in. They've made sure that it's available on mobile phones. They made sure it's available at this. It integrates with all of our communication channels like Slack. And the LMS there is really easy to use. So when it comes to reporting from an internal or external audit place, it's really easy to see. It sends out, reminders to staff. It can provide any of those kind of reportings around the completion rates and how quickly people completed their training and how effective that training was. How many clicks they had to do before they got the question right, etc. And the other thing I really like about it is they also have a behavioral based training too. So you can send out scenarios, you can work with your InfoSec team to say, I want to do a scenario on whether people are actually managing their passwords correctly or whether they're going to, get hit by a phishing attack. And you can actually send out behavioral based training and it proves the effectiveness of the training there and then. So for us, one of the things is not always about record taking, it's about continuous improvement. So to be able to prove that the initial training was effective because no one got their phishing attack, or they were dealing with their passwords or everything properly, it really helps us show our auditors and also our leadership that this level of training is effective and this is working and this is why, because we can see how effective these different areas are. And it's just engaging with our staff. Like, we've had so much feedback be like, this is not boring training, we actually really enjoy this, when's the privacy stuff coming out, and it's just like, that's the level of engagement you really want with your team, where they're starting to talk to you about the training and they're not just thinking, oh, compliance, I sent that email out, I've got to do my 3 hours of training. It's like, when's the next lot? So it's really engaging. And I think that's where we need to be adaptable to the type of time people have now, where it can fit in with their working practices. They just can't do what we used to do and sit down for a day and go through all of this different training. They need to be able to have it in bite size to fit around their hectic lifestyle.
I love that mission. How do you make GRC not a chore, but actually something people look forward to learning about because they think they're learning something new? That's amazing.
Yeah, it really helps because, in past, the burden on the GRC teams following up, complete your training, even that takes a lot of, when you think about your return on investment on having a GRC team in it internally, you don't want them to be spending all the time chasing people and their managers to complete training. So, it's one
That's
of those
great.
things. It's another big tick off the list of engaging staff, educating them, but also, looking at GRC in a much more, favorable way.
I love it. So, Annie, I've got my last question. Annie, what do you think we're going to be doing differently in the world of GRC 3 to 5 years from now?
I think the big thing for me is something we're already starting to do, is just more automated continuous compliance checks. So, moving away from that traditional, quarterly or monthly or annually compliance checking, moving away from that kind of checklist of activities and actually having continuous monitoring in the background that's then alerting you when compliance controls are actually breaking or they're at risk. And using that data of the report, that real data-driven intelligence around the continuous health of your compliance environment is going to be really important. This, particularly in the area of like tech, the speed of change, you need to be able to see where you're compliant, where you're not compliant at any given time. I can expect leadership to contact me and be like, we're thinking of doing X, acquiring Y, merging with them. What does this mean? Where are we right now? What can we say to our investors? What can we say to this? And you need to be able to have that continuous monitoring. You can't rely on just that, the clipboard walking around interviewing people anymore. So wherever possible, integrating with internal systems that are doing things like risk reporting, threat modeling, your actual systems that have back-end security controls in place, being able to monitor those is really going to be important. So moving away from more of the traditional approach of always auditing versus interview and collecting evidence there and then to that continuous approach of auditing and checking your health of compliance, I think.
Transforming compliance to assurance so that you know that what you're reporting is actually truthful and not just check the box activities. I love
Absolutely.
it.
And it's just going to be more data driven compliance. I think there was a lot left to opinion sometimes before, because you couldn't always get all of the data. It was you're interviewing teams, you're looking at the evidence they're providing, you have to make a point of time opinion that's actually going to carry you across for maybe the next quarter or 6 months. And that's what you were reporting to leadership. Whereas now If you have that data-driven compliance, you can say, well, at this point in time, it looked like this. Right now, it's looking like this. We're starting to see a trend. And again, it comes back to that trend analysis, which is so important. I mean, you look what we do with stocks and shares. We're always looking at them and seeing what the trends are, and that's how we determine what we should buy and what we should sell. It needs to be the same internally with when to make change and when not to make change based on the health of your organization. If you don't have that continuous data, I don't know how you can make adequate decisions.